Welcome one and all back to Driving and Dragons. I'm Daniel, and it's long past time to get some more gaming content up on the channel. Intelligence as a dump stat is a staple, and it's certainly entertaining, as is evidenced by how well it performs compared to other content. But I made this channel to share my insight on the hobby, and not just to gripe about the stupid things people say. So today, we will be returning to the 7 levels format to talk about an ironically evergreen topic in the tabletop world. The 7 levels of D&D Killer. Before we jump in, let me borrow your patience for a moment while I take care of the housekeeping. Please like the video if you find the content informative or entertaining. Share it with a few friends and ask them to do the same. If you really like it, use that hype feature to tell YouTube that you think others should discover what we do here. And if you agree, disagree, have something to add, or simply wish to say hi, hop in the comments where you will find a group of guys who are more than willing to engage in respectful discussion, including me. Most of you know that one of the long-term goals here is to restore cool cars and then give them away to members of the TTRPG community who could use the blessing in their lives. Ultimately, I would love to arrange RallyCon, a sort of mobile meta convention where for one price we all meet at, say, an Atlanta gaming convention and drive to maybe Gen Con in Wisconsin, stopping at other cons along the way. That may be a pipe dream, but who knows? We do have a car, 1974 Dodge Dart donated by an incredibly generous subscriber. What I need is the money to get the project rolling. And that's where Super Chats, Super Stickers, Patreon, and channel memberships all go. I don't take a dime from the channel for myself or to work on my own car that you do see in some of the videos. All the channel money goes to the project unless I run a stream that is specific for a special cause that I state up front. Last but not least is Corvid Codex, a collection of fantastic pulp short stories tailored for the TTRPG reader. The Kickstarter ends here in several hours and likely will have to either be restarted or extended, but I will be contacting every single backer to let them know about a loyalty benefit I will provide should they renew their support when I try for round 2. If you haven't seen Corvid Codex, check it out. The link will be in the description below, on the end screen, and in the pinned comment. Now that we have covered why I make videos, it's time to get back to making this one. As always, to have anything that remotely resembles a reasonable dialogue, we need to define a few terms. For instance, what is a D&D killer? Depending on how you define it, there could be hundreds or thousands of them out there, or there could have never been one ever at all. If you ask some people what makes the next D&D killer, they will reply that it's whatever the next decision made by WotC design teams or whatever the next woke bandwagon they jump on is. Even the definition of killer is up for debate. Some people will tell you that Pathfinder is a D&D killer because it briefly took the sales crown after WotC pulled back from the disaster of 4E. Meanwhile, one group will say that Pathfinder didn't kill anything because it wasn't even able to hold its own in the number 1 position against an active 4E product. Another will say that it isn't a D&D killer because it's just a 3.5e homebrew with a few sentences switched around to satisfy copyright. Yet another group will say that it isn't a D&D killer because sales don't matter. It's about recognition as a better system that actively erodes D&D's existing player base. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on a hybrid concept. It's 1 part market share, 1 part novel design, and 1 part hype to generate a kind of threat level against D&D. Since D&D isn't dead, it can't really have a killer at this point. And if you are defining dead as completely gone from the market, I seriously doubt that that is even possible within the next generation or so, barring some sort of cataclysmic market event that makes pen and paper games far and away the least of anyone's concerns. When I'm talking about the levels of D&D Killer here, I'm talking about assessing the level of legitimate threat to D&D's position as face of the hobby and its ability to retain its market share after its D&D Killer hype dies away. This is an inherently ambiguous topic, but hopefully that makes for interesting discussion in the comments. I'm sure there's no shortage of arguments, both in terms of examples and general discussion of the tiers themselves. A quick thing to remember here is that you have to avoid the single most meaningless non-argument in the world of the TTR, the entirety of the TTRPG ecosystem, and that's the my table argument. What works for your table is an example, not an argument. Discussing games must be a discussion about the center of the bell curve where most gaming tables exist, not the extreme ends where your Bro SR table or your 4D game or your wargaming group table exists. Well, to me, this game is a D&D killer because it got rid of the stuff my players find annoying and gave me a bunch of mechanics that are so much better for my group, is not an argument unless your table also represents the norm of everyone else. Killing D&D for you does not a D&D killer make unless it is also killing D&D for a significant plurality of the player base. So with that established, let's move on to level 1. Level 1, the self-proclaimed. Much like in the previous 7-level videos, you will find that the bottom 2 levels are kind of things that we almost all agree on that are not really a threat to D&D. We just kind of all agree that they're not a threat. In fact, for the most part, the lowest tier games aren't even recognized outside of the game reviewer or commentator space alone, let alone recognized as a D&D killer. They're just not even recognized, period. In the case of level 1, most of these games aren't even a threat to the designer in terms of him generating a tax liability. I hate to pick on the mentally handicapped here, but unfortunately it's an example most of us will at least recognize, and that's Condor DM's Neo TTRPG. Now, the Chess Pigeon himself has not actually claimed his game as a D&D killer using those exact terms, but his best game on the market period will serve to illustrate my point. A level 1 D&D killer is a game that the designer, usually within the first few weeks following a Wizards of the Coast self-inflicted injury, comes out and proclaims, play this instead of D&D, it fixes all the problems, and it isn't made by people who promote toilet paper rolling under instead of over. Thing is, 90% of the time, these games are slapped together in the immediate aftermath of a D&D lead designer saying that pet owners are terrible people deserving capital punishment, that puppy kicking is now a core mechanic in D&D. And you can tell that that's the case. These D&D killers are more often than not a hodgepodge of poorly structured homebrew tacked onto a bastard child of the current version of D&D, along with a handful of things the designer thought sounded cool from other games that they probably never played. Either that, or it's a game like Neo TTRPG, that's poorly tested, largely unfinished mess, which the designer then rushes to finish because he sees that the latest D&D screw-up has created an opportunity to get in and get people to buy into his game, where his game-changing medieval castle toilet mechanic that is definitely going to be the next big thing that will make us all forget about D&D. The only thing a level 1 D&D killer is slaying is the patience of the designer's regular players, and it's also going to slay however many acres of rainforest that his repeated use of AI writing and AI art generation are going to bring on. Level 2, targeted failures. Level 2 D&D killers are very closely related to both level 1 and level 3. This is when a designer specifically targets D&D and a perceived common issue with either the current edition or an incoming edition, and he purports to have a solution that will never make you want to play D&D again. As you will see in a moment, they're like level 3 in that the intent is to actually improve D&D with a handful of meaningful alterations. However, like level 1, they are an abject failure in that regard. Where level 1 is more or less a game trying to rage farm by pushing out a complete mess at the right time, level 2 is generally an attempt to take the current D&D edition and improve it in some meaningful way. If you ask me personally, I'd put Pathfinder here, as in my opinion, it essentially sets out to fix 3.5e D&D and ends up ruining it. But that's my personal opinion, and it isn't really the general perception by people with a respectable level of education in the area, so I just have to suck it up and say that no, Pathfinder's not in this tier. But it gives you the idea of what I think. This is the game that is, say, a 5e D&D, but only roll one level of hit points and slap on some odd mana point system for spellcasters to correct the issues with ridiculous levels of survivability and out-of-control cantrips and manipulation of the magic system. Unfortunately, they don't really adjust anything else, so what you end up with is a busted magic system that either makes wizards unplayable altogether or turns them into gods at level 2, because you took away all the hit point increases, but didn't do anything with damage, action economy, or the way armor works. Everybody now dies in one hit unless the dice just happen to come up on the minimum. Everybody here knows that I love a good analogy. So level 2 is like when that guy at work tells you how if he were in charge of the company, he would fix everything and it would be wine and roses forever. You know, because the guy who is a shift foreman at the Walmart warehouse knows how to run the multi-billion-dollar horizontally integrated corporation better than the people raised, trained, and educated off the tit to do it. Or even on the smaller scale, the HVAC guy who could run the business better than the boss man who built the company up from the ground, despite not even being able to run his own checkbook and household finances. That's the level 2 game designer. I play D&D every week, so I definitely know more about designing a game than actual professional game designers, despite never even so much as watching an RPG pundit video where he highlights a handful of the basics. Level 3, D&D but. Think you can all see how this relates to level 2 now. Level 3 is pretty self-explanatory. It's a D&D killer because it's just like D&D, but it's in space. But it's modern day. But it's based on shonen anime. This is where the game makes no qualms about the fact that it is just a tweak on an existing D&D edition. Sometimes it's even less than that, and it's just a palette swap. We just made some name changes and flavor text adjustments to the existing D&D classes in whatever edition to make it the World War I Jerry's flamethrower instead of fireball, and to put it, put out as D&D but the Great War D&D Killer. Or not even a palette swap, just D&D but votes like you, or D&D but doesn't support people who hate you. Level 3 games work. They are perfectly playable. Some of them they may even appeal to you individually more than D&D because of the messaging, the art style, the writing, or even the support the game gets in terms of supplements and such. But these games are still firmly in the no threat to D&D camp, if for no other reason than everyone knows that they are just D&D with a new paint job. Half the time, these D&D killers do the opposite by either encouraging secondary purchase of D&D books so that players can adapt them to the new game, or simply devolving into D&D supplements themselves over time. It's D&D, but it is too closely related to D&D to be a D&D killer. Level 4 misses the mark. In Level 4, we find the first crop of games that can truly stand on their own merit and even challenge D&D for a portion of their player base. The designers of these games often don't see D&D as a competitor at all. They certainly don't view their games as a D&D killer. When these games get called D&D Killer, it comes from the outside, from the TTRPG intelligentsia itself. The issue is that while those of us who are buried so deep in the hobby may want these games to somehow slay the giant on the playground, the other 95% of people who buy and play these games don't see it that way. Hell, even the majority of the people who call these games D&D killers are like, well, we play that and sometimes we play this other game too when we're taking a break from our D&D campaign. See the problem? Level 4 D&D killers are certainly good enough games to challenge D&D. Most of them are actually better games than D&D by most objective measures. But they fill different roles and exemplify different niches to the point that they just join D&D in the rotation of games the table plays. This is where you find things like Vampire the Masquerade, Call of Cthulhu, Cyberpunk, Traveler, all great games with enduring player bases and significant success. more than one of which has been heralded as a D&D killer in its early days. But they all miss the mark because they are too different to D&D, not just in aesthetic or genre, but in the very style of play their mechanics facilitate. In level 4, you may as well include football, Monopoly, and trivia competitions as D&D killers because they are all games that D&D players could choose to play instead. However, nobody who loves the play D&D generates is replacing it with Monopoly. They might just choose to play Monopoly this week instead of D&D. Level 5, the Celebrity Crush. We all know this was coming. Perhaps no level is more heavily populated, at least openly and publicly, than level 5. This is where the fantasy RPGs that are direct competition for D&D that come from within the D&D space exist. These are the games that are tied to some sort of gaming or genre celebrity and get their marketing push from those tie-ins. Sometimes it's a game like the new Stormlight Archive game, which is based on Brian Sanderson novels. But let's be real, the actual game is Call to Adventure, a system nobody ever called a D&D killer, that has a Sanderson branding slapped on it. Now it's a D&D killer, because it's got his name on it, and it's fantasy. In all reality, if Hasbro had offered terms even close to as favorable to Mr. Sanderson, it would be D&D the official Stormlight campaign setting. But instead, a smaller publisher saw a chance to sell more of their game than it merits on its own, and boom, we have a D&D killer. And it isn't just Cujo and Carrie, the new game by Stephen King and Chaosium that runs off of Call of Cthulhu we're talking about here either. It's also your MCDM by Matt Colville that ironically has Dungeon Master implied in the title. It's Daggerheart, ironically birthed from Wizards of the Coast, threatening Darrington Press's 5e Matt Mercer money machine with a change in the OGL. It's any game attached to a celebrity, live play DM, or author, or streamer that has better PR than Wizards and a substantial brand presence. These games almost never go anywhere in terms of disrupting the TTRPG market. Why? Because 90% of the time they're just a paint job on some other game, and once the novelty wears off, they just go on the shelf and collect dust. In a way, it would be like if Dungeons & Dragons was just Forgotten Realms and presented itself as the Forgotten Realms role-playing game. A big part of what keeps D&D alive, through every failed experiment, bad business decision, stupid press release, and failed edition, is the fact that it promises that you can be in any world and play in any setting. While yes, you can do this with any other TTRPG, when we sit down to play Cyberpunk, there's an implication that we're going to be playing in Night City. And when you look at these celebrity games and stuff like that, they're inherently tied to the worlds that were built by those celebrities. So you're not going to play Stormlight Archives in your own world. Stormlight Archives is going to be in Brian Sanderson's world. And if you don't want that, I think it's Brandon Sanderson, but it doesn't matter, his world. If you don't like it, tough noogies, you're going to have to play D&D so you can play in this other world. Just like your sister's obsession with NSYNC, this little celebrity crush will pass too, and good old reliable D&D will be right there waiting for you. Level 6, I liked it better. As much as it pains me, this is where Pathfinder belongs, right here in level 6. You could almost put the entirety of the OSR on this level as well, since 90% of the OSR games are just old versions of D&D. This is typically happens just when D&D changes editions and does so in a way that pisses off enough people that you can literally copy the previous game and get a measure of success. And I'm not saying it never happens in the middle of an edition, but they're the biggest threat to D&D at the on the edition changes. When D&D 2e dropped, a host of games dropped in response, including a bunch of games built to model AD&D. It helped that 2e was backwards compatible, but it still happened. Most famously at the end of 3.5e, when a combination of the original OGL Crisis and a very unpopular 4th edition created an opening, Paizo came into being with the ultimate D&D killer, homebrewed Pathfinder. Let's face it, Pathfinder is just a hamstrung version of 3.5e D&D. And the OSR movement's basically the same thing. We liked old D&D better, so we're going to either copy it or make a spiritual successor and kill modern D&D with it. Here's Castles and Crusades, which is often said to be Gary Gygax's vision for 2nd edition. Here's Dungeon Crawl Classics, where all the older editions vomited and we mixed it together. Here's White Box, where the basic expert took original D&D and the parts of Chainmail that were recommended to use with it and threw out Gary Gygax's pretentious twaddle in $10 words and streamlined it into, original D&D. Level 6 is essentially old D&D competing with current D&D, and one day soon we will have Rainbows and Unicorns, the new copy-paste of 5e for players who hate 6e and or D&D 2024, and that'll be a D&D killer. The problem inherent in level 6 is that in the end, it's still D&D, and it keeps the game alive while trying to kill it. And the only thing that really differentiates it between level 6 and back there in old level 2 is, levels 2 and 3, is that it doesn't wreck D&D in the process. It's basically just D&D, and the tweaks tend to be pretty minor for the most part to kind of set it apart a little. Level 7, here we are, Hybrid Threats. This is it, the top of the D&D killer heap. In my opinion, if there is ever a real D&D killer, it's gonna come from level 7. These are hybrid games, fusion systems, if you will. Most often they are based on D&D, but they don't really have to be. They just have to check enough of the Dungeons and Dragons boxes that they will feel like a game the average table could replace D&D with. Not just, we like investigation better so we play Call of Cthulhu, but we want to play medieval fantasy adventure with a high degree of customization and personalization available, and we will grab this instead of D&D every single time. They also have to be different enough that they aren't something that is going to send people reaching for that D&D book that they can adapt to this game. It's kind of in the Goldilocks zone, as it were. These are games that built a better mousetrap and D&D better than D&D. That's the only way you can truly build a D&D killer. And I hate to sound like I'm on a bandwagon, but Shadow Dark kind of fits this category pretty nicely. No, I don't think Shadow Dark is any real threat to D&D at this juncture. But in theory, Shadow Dark is built from pieces of several D&D editions, along with a few highlighted and adapted mechanics that give us a game that is D&D enough to scratch the Dungeons & Dragons itch, but is unique enough that it still gets treated as its own individual game system and not just another D&D or nostalgia bait game. The Palladium games that came out in the 90s, I think, fit this. Unlike, say, Vampire, which was very much a level 4 D&D killer, Palladium has games that check off those all-important D&D but different boxes needed to be a true Dungeons & Dragons replacement. But it is most certainly not Dungeons & Dragons. So what do you think? What games do you think go in which levels? Do you even agree with the levels as I presented them? You just let me know below in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.